and we are off to, another Siebel Friday. So let me start with showing you what we have in mind for today. A quick agenda. All right, of course, we talk about 23.2 in a minute. And so that's the first topic. And as is customary, if we have special guests, and we do have today, we have Nick from Duke Clinical Research Institute. Nick is a regular on Siebel Friday, and he has already shared, I think a year ago, a lot of insight on OAuth authentication and the inbound REST API with Siebel. So, and he has prepared quite a stunning presentation. So that'll be after we introduce 23.2. And then if there's still time and people are still listening and interested, we have a little bit of tips and tricks on updating Siebel, or talk about how to get to the latest release. And I recently experimented with web components with Siebel OpenUI. Would like to share that. So yeah, off we go with the highlights of 23.2. So let me just make that a little bit bigger. So, and well, that's already it. 23.2 is out. It's generally available. Bookshelf is out there. But as the release notes inform us, there's no new features. And the Oracle blog also informs us that there are no new features in this release. That doesn't mean it's worthless or not worth considering, because there is a lot of bug fixes documented for that. And well, yeah, that's it really. There's nothing more from my side that I could have found out about this update package. Maybe
I'll comment
Brian.
on it if you'd like to. Yeah, the reason there's no features in there is about timing. When we approve check-in for a new feature, it's actually about 6 to 8 weeks before the release, right? So it has to meet a certain criteria by that point before we'll consider it to be included in the future release. Because of all the holidays in December and early January, depending where you are, we elected to say we're not going to do any features during that period, because we won't have the usual amount of time to then confirm that nothing is wrong with the feature once it's integrated. So it's just simply a way to avoid, trying to change the behavior of the application and possibly miss out on testing it as well as we could. So that's the reason. So I would expect this behavior pretty much annually, depending when the holidays fall. It could happen to 24.1 or 24.2 or 24.3, I don't know, depending on the timing. But this behavior, I think you should expect to see annually because of the winter holidays. And then the good part about it, though, is it gave us an opportunity to get caught up on a lot of smaller bugs as opposed to features that typically are smaller. So there's actually quite a number of, as Alex said, there's a large number of bug fixes in here. Some of them you won't see. I don't know if you guys know, our release notes and our monthly update guide only show bugs that were found by customers. We don't release things that were found by us, because we found it was confusing people to say, well, I never saw that problem, because you never did. We found it internally and fixed it internally before any customer saw it. But anyway, so it was a large number of bugs that were added. The other thing is, and I don't know if they've fixed the bookshelf yet, but the bookshelf also had a pretty big catch-up job of a lot of outstanding documentation bugs, but like a much larger number than usual, because they didn't have to write any of the feature stuff. And in turn, though, unfortunately, then the initial release of the bookshelf didn't actually include all the updated guides. So I don't know if that's fixed yet or not, but a significant number of documentation bugs were also addressed.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thanks much for Brian for sharing this very valuable insight right from the source. It's always best to hear it from Oracle directly. So yeah, thanks for this. And I'll hand over to Nick for his presentation on OAuth and the inbound REST API. So here you go, Nick.
Well, it's been a year, and Brian and his group has actually gave us something new that I've started to implement. Is the ability to execute a workflow directly from a REST API, which I found made our process so much simpler. I mean, you'll see in the process, there's a lot less steps on my side that have to get executed. I don't have to create a service that calls a workflow, blah, blah, blah. So it's really kind of nice. So why do we use, one of the things we found out why we had to use OAuth 2 is that if we use basic authentication, that means I have to give my partner or user a Siebel user ID and password at the database level. And the levels of access, for a general user at the database level is pretty open. So our DBA put the total lock, stop, and no can do on us, so we couldn't do it. So we had to go to OAuth 2, which made a whole lot of sense because now the client and the secret are outside of Siebel, and the only connection is with the employee record on the database. So they have no access whatsoever into Siebel except through that client ID secret. They can't log in through the URI, the login channels. It's just not possible. It just doesn't work. So they're pretty much only allowed to go through the REST API. So that's why we ended up doing OAuth. Some of the things were the increased security, the no database user in a Siebel database exposed outside of Siebel or our premise. We have to use a particular client ID secret for a REST inbound call. We give our partner or our internals an integration URL for their REST API. And then there's two methods, which I said earlier, is now service and workflow. And I'll kind of show both of the paths when we go. The key components to implementing it is basically you have to have an OAuth client ID and client secret. You have to set up a Siebel application object manager. You need to create a special LDAP profile, and you need to create a special SMC AI profile. With those four together, and then they talk to each other really well. So I kind of took the Oracle presentation and documentation. I have references later on in the document, and made it more DCRI focused more than anything else. And to me, it helps me understand what goes where and who's involved. So for the service, we do the REST API does a call to OAuth, and it gets the information it needs, and then it sends that bearer token to the SMC profile, right? And then it goes to the AOM. Let's see. Then it goes. Then Siebel. Let's see. Then so the OAuth, the client, the REST API call goes to the register OAuth entry, gets a token, passes that token into the SMC profile, and then Siebel will go out and do an introspect with that client ID and secret to validate the token. And when the token is validated, it'll come back with a user ID, and in this particular case, a scope of service, which it then brings into the SMC profile. We pass that to the application object manager. Then eClinical setup. We use eClinical REST. We create a special object for it, and then it processes it to the token. We get single sign-on tested. LDAP verifies that user is okay. We do a lookup of the user. We check their responsibilities. We go to the business service application area, look for the workflow process manager, check to see if the method is being processed okay, and then we execute the workflow and return them a response. And a little simpler, this is how we REST call basically calls our server. We execute the workflow. This is execute a service to call the workflow and does all this good stuff in here. This is our process. So the thing we have to do is configure the service method. You must be able to, I can read this. You need to make sure that the add responsibility adapter service so that we can get access to it. I'm all confused here right now. These are notes I got out of the Siebel documentation. So each business service, so you can use the Siebel REST API to access business services. Before you do that, you must associate the business service with responsibility control access and its methods. It is recommended you not add responsibility to the EIA Siebel adapter business service because it could cause an issue. This is why we created a special EI REST AOM.
Nick, if I may?
Yeah, please.
So basically what you're presenting is you implemented a service call to the REST API, right? So using a copy of the workflow process manager business service to run the workflow.
Yes.
And then 22.3 Oracle added the capability to run the workflow directly without the need to have a business service invocation. And I think I remember discussions when people started adding the likes of workflow process manager or EI Siebel adapter business service. So those very general big, big boys in the business service business, and they added them to the access list for responsibilities, essentially cutting them off for anybody else who didn't have those responsibilities, and it caused a lot of trouble. I think that's what the notes are saying in Bookshelf. So you shouldn't actually use the business service access control for those big business services like Workflow Process Manager, because then you get into trouble, or EI Siebel adapter. Okay, sorry.
Right. No. Thank you for clarifying, because I just copy notes down and it reminds me what to do. So basically what I ended up doing is creating basically client ID REST IDs for employees. And I found out that if you don't make them an employee with position, then the SBU is null and none of your queries work. So that one was real critical. Took me a while to figure that out, especially with the workflow process one. So we make sure that we have a responsibility. Oops. Back. Make sure we have a user ID that is basically the client ID that you get from OAuth. And then you associate a responsibility and a position. Configuring a business service, basically we have the responsibility, we have the workflow process, and you can see I've done a workflow process manager REST I created, as Alex suggested, and then a run process. So when we do the responsibilities, we add the 2 responsibilities to this workflow process manager REST, so they can access the process. And this is this process for the workflow. And basically, you see, I don't have the same. Sorry, got dogs out here, green mother. So this time, you can't use the, you have to set up your OAuth client so that the scope is workflow. And when we did this with the other one, you notice that the scope is service. So there are two different scopes, and those are how you get into the REST services. So that's really critical on your OAuth setup. But everything after this, after the SMC part, all this is the same, except I don't have to call the business service that calls the workflow. I just call the workflow itself, and off it runs. And same process, the only difference is I'm calling workflow versus anything else. I'm still calling the same workflow. Same message. Here you set up different. You do business process access instead of business service. Same response. You see I'm using the workflow here versus the business service in the responsibilities. Same thing with the responsibilities. Make sure that they're set up accordingly. So this particular client user ID is going to be, this user ID is going to be the same as my OAuth client user ID. You got to configure your AOM for OAuth authentication. The two prerequisites you must do on that AOM is must be configured for SSO when OAuth is enabled. And the related security adapter also required in SSO mode. The Siebel API later contacts the OAuth server over a secure channel to validate and get the token to enable HTTPS. The required certificate from OAuth server must be installed on the environment where the Siebel REST is hosted. So your common trust store. What is it they call it, Alex? Not the server trust store, but the overall trust store.
The trusted Tomcat trust store.
Yeah, so that has to be installed on the. You have to put that certificate in there. So it's in the common. When you configure the AOM, we created a new enterprise LDAP profile because of having these parameters to be changed. This is real key, these two parameters, because this trust token is what's going to be put in your SMC profile.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? So is it effectively offloading all the token side to be sort of in the SMC, and then from there, when it hits the object manager, it's very much like the current single sign-on, where it's actually being quite generic? Is it doing something similar, like when you set the username in the header for SSO?
I'm not
because
sure.
Because the token and all that seems to be at the SMC level and above, and everything below that seems to be very similar to how you fudge single sign-on. Alex, am I making any sense?
Yes. So that's true. But so once you set the REST authentication to OAuth 2, there's basically a field for the token, much like when you do the regular SSO.
Mm-hmm.
And that token must match the token on the security adapter, be it LDAP like or the database SSO that you can do since a few years. So yes, you're right. It's on the back end, basically on the Siebel side. It's all the same. It's just what the AI
on the front end on the SMC, it's doing the token, and that's where the OAuth authentication is happening. Yes. And after that, it's just the standard single sign-on.
So the AI will contact the OAuth server again. It will validate that bearer token, that that you send in with your request. It will revalidate that, and then it will, well, establish a session on the OM using the SSO method, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's what happens, right?
And since our site does not use SSO sign-on, is the reason we ended up having a special LDAP security adapter for it.
So Nick, if I may ask,
Sure.
is there any kind of caching of that token, or is every request going through what appears to be a somewhat expensive authentication and authorization process?
When we have it set up, there's a timeout on the token. So whatever the timeout is set at the OAuth level is where will be the length of the token length. Right now, we have so few transactions, they're just like 5 or 10. They can do them within one session without having to refresh a token.
All right, thank you.
So the component definition, we set up a special REST also, so we could make sure we have all the LDAP adapters and all the components pointing to this when we use REST. And these were the component parameters. So I use the LDAP security REST, so I make sure I'm putting that SSO and the trust token on the application. Advanced parameters, these are all the doc IDs that I got this information from. And then this doc ID says change EIA config to disable last login. And since the component EIA config will be, it's the same as the other, would be good. And then this is what I use to register our particular OAuth. We're using Siebel, and they've set up a way for us to create our own client and secret ID. So this user ID, the CTMS REST workflow, is one that has to be an employee with the responsibility and the position. The client secret we would use in the SMC when we're ready. These are just descriptions. Then there's the redirect URIs that we use, where I have the server name, and then we use this port for this particular REST. When I do a service, when we do a REST service versus a REST workflow, I use 9621. So we've decided to use the 9600 series at this 9600 series and above for any individual REST calls we have coming in from different partners. When you do this, got misspelling there. Oops. The scope, when we do setting up OAuth, has to be workflow. In our particular site, that has to be done by our support team. I don't have a choice to put it in there. And you cannot put workflow and service as scopes for that user. Siebel doesn't like it. So it has to be one or the other. So you can't share a user ID between a service and a workflow REST call. And these are the two types we authenticate with. Siebel uses the client credentials, and to make sure that your introspect is true. And credentials are client secret over HTTP post. It's how we have our OAuth set up. And this will be maybe different with your sites or not. I'm not sure. Depends on how you have OAuth set up. But these are the key things you need to do. Is this client ID has to be an employee responsibility with position. You need the client secret to put on the SMC profile, and you need to make sure it's scope and your client credentials and introspect true. These are all the key pieces. So after you've got the OAuth set up, you need to create a new AI, just application container configuration. Just like here's the ports we use, like regular REST call service. We have 2 set up, depending on who's calling us, and then our REST workflow. And it's like 96, 11, 12, 13, 21, 22, 23, 31, 32, 33 for the ports. And so once you have it installed, you navigate to the new AI directory. And you'll see this is an example of what was created. The next thing you need to go to your base AI, the one that's used with the gateway and everything, and note the field down here, the URI. This is the host for the gateway, because this is what you need to put into your root one. So you go from this particular look for the profile to this one, and all you do is add that particular field. Once you have that set up, you log on to SMC, navigate to the application interface, you have three options. You clone existing application interface, create a new one, or modify existing. Since I already have a REST API out there, I have a regular AI out there, I chose to clone. It was easier for me. Once you have your OAuth registry complete, you have to keep your client ID in secret. And then when you configure the OAuth authentication, these are the fields you need to put in. Introspect URL, which is your OAuth authentication server, the client ID that you created for this particular service, the secret, trust token. This is the trust token that's on your LDAP REST, and then session timeout. And this will be, you want to secure, the secure channel is where the import of the URIs come in. We deselect this box.
That's about the certificate. If you select the box, you must make sure that there's the root certificate of the authentication server, the OAuth server, is available in the trust store. It uses a secure channel to validate the bearer token.
I'll have to check mine then, see how it works. Thank you, Alex. So basically, this is the inbound authentication. We have our anonymous user at the database level. We check the OAuth. This is our particular introspect URL. This is our client ID, then the client secret, and then the trust token from our LDAP, and a session timeout. And eventually, I'll try to see how secure channel works for us. Ensure you use different set of ports on the new AI profiles. When you choose, we chose the, like I said, 9600 series. Make sure your object manager has been set up as SSO. Your REST API for the person calling in with base URL and maximum connections. This is configuring the REST inbound defaults, which are, this is your port when you're deploying. This will be the port you're deploying. So it would be what your server host is and the port, whatever profile you created, deploy, and names. And when I test with Postman, I do 3 tests, basically. I request a token based on the client ID secret going against the OAuth server. I do a introspect, take the token, and then I actually execute the REST call. So when you take the token for the introspect, it's in the body as a token in Postman. You just put your token in here, do your send call, and this is what you'll retrieve. This is what Siebel sees back coming in. It sees its scope and sees its user ID. And that's how it knows that the token that Siebel sent to the OAuth through the introspect returns what they're expecting to see, a scope of workflow and a user ID that's in the Siebel employee record. And then when we test it, I just take the token, put it in, and then I execute basically here a workflow. This is the workflow I'm executing. I found this was one of the things you could do with the new workflow is exclude empty fields. And because our workflow just uses an incoming XML, we just had this file. This body you'll have to experiment with on your workflows on what field. This was a parameter on the workflow that it's expecting, and then it does this process with that. So some of you may have multiple input file names to your workflow or whatever process it is, because this will be the area that it took me and Alex a while to figure out what we were supposed to put in there, because we'd never done the workflow one before. For my workflow, it was just incoming process.
That was a bit trial and error, but essentially it's if you have an input property in your workflow, a process property, and that's in with an in or out setting, then it's just a property or an attribute in the incoming body. So that's the rule, and yeah, and I like I like the protocol. Now it's Siebel message XML via JSON. That's quite unique.
And so these are the supported methods and headers that I got from Bookshelf. And these are the additional references that I got a lot of my stuff from. And if you need to call, give me a call. I'll help you the best I can. I'm a visual type guy. I don't always have the answers, as you've already seen today. Lots of help from lots of people got me here. Brian's group, tech support, Alex. Lots of people got us to where we've got it working.
Okay. Wow, great stuff. Thanks, Nick, for presenting this and for sharing it with our group and with all the Siebel nerds on the planet. Really great stuff.
And if anybody would like a copy of it, Alex has a copy he can send to you.
Yeah, so that's the presentation PowerPoint you're willing to share?
Yeah. And I also have the if you want, I can show the SMC and stuff like that live if you want.
Cool, thanks. Wow.
Yeah, this is fantastic. We're trying to move more and more to Rust, and this is going to be a huge help. Thanks, Nick.
Can I ask a question? Actually, a similar question was already asked, but I didn't get the answer, so excuse me. I'm about this, not about refreshing the token, but about validating. Does validation of the token happens on each request? So actually, when one time when the token was validated, and I will send like the second request in short time after that, and it's not expired yet. But in this case, the Siebel still contacts the OAuth server to validate this token, or it's something like it's somehow cached, but it's already valid.
Yeah, Nick, do you have any insight on how often, or is the token validated on every request, or is it cached somehow?
I would not know. I would guess it validated on each request because they send a token in on every request. So if you have one request, well, our user will probably get a token each time for each call. It takes minimal, it's microseconds, because of course it's internal for us right now.
It makes.
I don't know about.
Hey, Nick. I would
Yeah.
think that if it's a stateful interface, then it could just use the same token. But if it's individual stateful requests, then, or sorry, other way around. Like if you have a long running login where you just keep sending things from the same system, if you could maintain a session token in the calling system and it wouldn't have to validate every time, I think.
Right.
Okay.
Whereas if you're just doing ad hoc requests from random different systems, then it's going to have to, then it's going to be sessionless. So you'd have to validate the token every time. At least that'd be my expectation. Kerry, does that make sense to you if you're on here?
Yes, that's the way it works.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for the answer, Brian and Kerry. All right, so Nick, you're still showing your screen. That's on purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're showing the AI profile that you set up for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think there's 3 different profiles, and when you go to deployment, you'll see
you have 4 AIs.
multiple
Yeah.
4 AIs.
Okay.
And we found that early on, you have to have 1 AI for each of the different client IDs and secrets.
Yeah, because they're
That's
like is a one-to-one relationship.
It is a one-to-one relationship and a one-to-one relationship at scope level. So it's
Right.
client ID, secret, and scope is what is associated with each AI.
Yeah.
It's dependent on how you work with your client. One AI may be able to make multiple calls because you have to set it up in the business process or business service area for all the different services or workflow, that particular responsibility and that particular client ID get associated to. So if you just want to have a partner A responsibility, then all the services or workflows that they want to process can be under that. They may only need the one or 2 REST URLs.
Yeah. So you don't need one AI per workflow, so you can call any workflow
Right.
once you have that AI that handles workflows, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I can't claim to understand exactly how it works, but I was talking to Holger on my team about this, who's our security guy. He said it's possible to set up a single AI, but you would have to have some other proxy agent in between. So it would handle authenticating many different systems, and then it would use a single token to get into Siebel, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense.
But I don't know how exactly you make that happen, so I can't give any more detail than that. But in theory, that should be doable. But I mean, either way, you're still going to need the multiple secrets per, third party, whether you set it up in Siebel or in some other, web proxy or whatever it is, load balancer, I don't even know. Simply because you're not going to want to give the same secret to multiple applications.
Okay. So yeah, great stuff. Thanks much again to Nick for your willingness to share and for the great presentation. So yeah, you have the contact address from Nick and you have mine. So if you have any questions, and yeah, please give Nick a round of applause. Clap your hands.
And if you'd like, I could show you how our OAuth is, how those fields are done in our OAuth, if you're interested.
Yeah, great. So expect a lot of calls. All right. So I'll carry on. Oh, sorry. Do you want to, Nick? You wanted to show something?
They wanted to see the OAuth, how ours.
Oh
looks.
yeah. Let's do that. So sorry. You can go ahead with sharing.
So our OAuth is to do the authentication, and basically, so like the workflow, here's where you have the client ID, the secret, the name, reason, the redirect URL, and then the scope, and then the grant types, and then the credentials. And then here's your timeouts you were talking about. And I don't do refresh tokens. So it's 10 minutes the token's good for.
Okay, and that's an on-premise environment that you have.
Right. Then, so regular product, this is a regular REST, and the difference here is the scope. The only difference is scope and the URL. It's a 21 here versus the other one was a 31. So this one here is the 31.
Okay.
And that's,
well, that's great. And what's the name of the system? Can you share that?
it's Shibboleth. We're using Shibboleth.
Shibboleth. Right, I remember. Okay, that's a funny name.
It is.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks, Nick. So, okay for me to take over screen?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, there we go. So, yeah, we have a bit of time left, and I think when we talked about 23.2 with the great insight from Brian, thanks again that this is a featureless release, but nonetheless has lots of bug fixes. So people might consider updating to 23.2, updating to the latest.
Alex, is it worth us just maybe sharing some of the issues we've had with 23.1, because they will still be in 23.2, just as for people if they are going to do that, because
you're referring to that one bug with ToNumber?
Well, we've had a couple more, but basically just to make people aware, and if anyone wants any more detail, James will be able to give this. There does seem to be issues with floating point calculations and rounding errors in 23.1, which has made us pull it, and they're not in the current. They're not fixed in February's, and there's no current timeline. So I'm just putting it out there as a caution. If you are looking at 23.1 or 23.2, I'd spend a lot of time around your numbers. James, I don't know if you want to comment anymore.
I can comment. Or Kerry, do you want to comment?
No, that's fine. I'm done.
Yeah. I'll comment. We're aware of the problem. It actually affects 22.12 as well. Kerry, do you want to take over? You can be pretty open.
Yeah, we made a fix that to the ToNumber method, and
ToFix is what we made the fix on. We just screwed up and did it in the wrong place.
We found it yesterday, or we found the cause yesterday, and it's being worked right now.
Yeah, and it is an absolute top priority, because since it's has to do with rounding and many other things are affected. Obviously for certain use cases, especially probably financial, we understand it has a massive impact. But literally, Kerry and I spent our afternoon yesterday hunting down the exact problem in the code, and we know exactly where it is, and we're working to remove that fix, which will reintroduce the problem with ToFixed, sometimes not rounding properly. But we're going to eliminate the larger problem that we introduced, and then we'll figure out in the long term how to fix the issue with rounding on the original method.
Yep.
Okay. So expect, for any of you who are affected, or if customers affected, if you're a partner, it affects 22.12, 23.1, and 23.2. We are building a POC for 22.12 right now, because we have a customer who's very desperate for a fix. And then we expect to also make POC builds for 23.1 and 23.2. And then we will get we'll back out that fix in 23.3. So 23.3 will not show that behavior. And then, like I said, the ToFixed function, which is what set us down this road, it incorrectly rounds, and it always has. This isn't new. It's just no one noticed apparently before. There's certain circumstances where it rounds incorrectly because of floating point, trying to represent a fraction in a floating point, formatted in a binary format, more accurately, is sometimes not possible. There are certain numbers, you get, I think it was 1/5, you end up with something like point in binary, something like 0011, 0011, 0011, 0011 forever. Well, obviously we run out of bits at 32. So depending where it gets cut off for a given fraction, it will round the wrong direction because of literally one bit being flipped.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the background.
I mean, Brian, thanks for that, because that's a much detailed response. I mean, to be fair to my colleague James, I think he'd actually spotted the likely cause was the other fix. He's done a lot more work on this.
Yeah.
I just wanted to raise it because I've got to go shortly. And thank you for the detailed explanation. We know floating point errors are not as easy as they often sound, but that's the best detailed response we've had through support, where it's we need that quality to come through.
Yeah. Well, it was yesterday that we kind of proved it was that fix. In other words, we were pretty sure it was, but it is. Yeah. Now we've proven that, so we know what we can back out and get you POCs as soon as possible. And we know what to back out at 23.3, and then we'll just spend more time, because it's pre-existing anyway, figuring out the right solution to 2 fixed. Although I think Kerry already has some good ideas there, but I don't want to go beyond that.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Thanks so much, Brian. Yes, for the transparency here in this little forum, and for sharing these very valuable insights with us and with the customers. So good to hear there's a POC in the works, so that even if you decide to, get into gears to update to, let's say, 23.2, you can expect a POC, as Brian says, for that nasty little bug. And so, yeah, I'll spend a few minutes on one topic I discussed with customers. Many customers updated recently. And speaking of updates, I have published another poll, as is customary, like every month or so. And this poll is here on the Siebel Hub page, on the community page, and I'm posting the URL in the chat, so you can participate in that. So it's a version check poll, and I was quite surprised that, let me reload that. So we have 13 votes, 13 votes so far, so 13 people voted, and the large majority is on 22. And there's even looks like 23.1 or higher. So if you put these two together, it's more than 80% are on something higher than 22.1 probably. And that is a good sign that lots of people are updating Siebel, keeping Siebel updated every few months or so. And then the big question, the elephant in the update room, is the repository upgrade, which, if you leave a long gap between your versions, you have a cumulative repository upgrade of several dozen or multiple years of work on the Oracle side. So I'm trying to picture this here in a very old-fashioned diagram, which I used for upgrades from prior versions. But here we have a mini upgrade in situation. So I had one customer who updated from 20.6, not to 23.2, but 22.12 it was. And so there was a lot of changes that the customer made, of course. That's what customers do, they customize. And Oracle is also, of course, busy and innovates and puts in all these features into the repository upgrade, which is optional, as we know. So we try to identify a safe way before actually running it or while running it to identify any potential conflicts between one type of object, which is really prone to conflicts in this situation. It's the customer modified standard objects. Think of a workflow process like the order management workflow processes that have been modified by Oracle in 22.12. And that customer uses order management quite heavily. So they have customized the exact same workflow. They had like 300 versions of it already before they upgraded to Siebel 20. So that workflow process is heavily customized, and now the repository upgrade adds changes by Oracle. And if you know what I mean, workflow processes, or the same is true for tasks or web templates, anything that is like a sequential code, it cannot be automatically merged because you have either the version from Oracle or either your custom version, and any merge attempt is going to be literally screwed up and you have to manually repair it. So the customer wanted to have an easy way to have a full list of customizations. And one thing, and that's the only thing I came up with really, was to get into the Siebel server after applying the binary update. And in the bin folder, you will find zip files, quite a few of them. And the repository upgrade zip file, after applying the binary update, that's the one containing all the CIF files and seed data import files for any repository upgrade that is applicable on your environment. So I've copied that zip file and extracted it. That's 23.1, but you get the idea. And you can see quite clearly that it has subfolders for every release. So starting at 20.3, there are a few missing. There weren't any upgrades here, but let's say 23.1 is the last one. And if you look into just the sheer size of the folders, actually gives away if there's a lot of or not. Well, almost the same size. And then look into the folders and you find, well, not this one. Let me get another one. 22.11. Yeah. You get schema CIF files. So that's the schema changes that the repository upgrade will apply. And it's cumulative. So if you update to 23.2 and run the repository upgrade, and you haven't run the repository upgrade 22.11, you will get these schema changes. That's a CIF file, but it's applied as well to your development database. So that's number one. The customer was concerned, does it alter my database? And I say, yes, of course, it will import the schema changes and will apply them. And then you have seed data.
Hey, Alex, may I interject about that?
Yeah.
Please? For the schema, yeah, it absolutely will change your database, but you know,
it's additive.
We only add things.
Yeah, it's additive.
So
yeah,
it's always additive. We're not going to screw up any customization you've done to something, which is not true in something like 21.9 where we screwed up, but and reset the activity table. But these are only additive, so it shouldn't mess up any table that you already have changed. So that part's safe. I mean, because it's just now you have extra columns, but kind of who cares, right?
Yeah,
they don't do anything; they just sit there.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so
until you actually, deliver the repository part, which is what you're about to go into. At that point, now you have BizComps and so on built on those tables.
Right.
But until that happens, they're just they're invisible essentially to see. Mm-hmm. They're just in the database. But anyway, go ahead with the other.
Yeah, well, they are altering the schema of the development database. So the question of the customer also was, is there a rollback? And the only rollback that I could find was actually take a backup of the database before you run it.
Which I recommend anyway.
Yeah,
I also recommend a database backup every night, and that you have logging turned on such that you can restore to any minute in time.
Yeah, but it's not like because some people were under the assumption, okay, we ran the repository upgrade, now there's this integration workspace with stuff in it, let's not deliver it, and that so it doesn't affect us. But of course, everybody does a backup, and of course, do an extra backup before you run the repository upgrade. So the seed data is also imported and you can lean into those language folders, and you will find those .dat files, and just open a random .dat file here. It's readable somehow, so you can at least get to, well, there's some system preferences, some list of values, test automation keyword. There was the release with the test automation keyword. And the C data is important because you have to actually proactively prepare the migration of them, because you run the repository upgrade only on development. You don't run it on RR. So the migration application has to transport them. So make sure you use the application data service and that INP file that it generates as well. That was a nice insight. And
we're working on that.
Okay, great to hear. And then there's the repository.
Sorry, also, Alex, there's also a difference I want to just point out. For the schema, it's cumulative. For the seed data, it's not. It's only, in other words, if you go look in the 2210 folder, you'll see a small amount of seed data, and you'll see a small amount in each one. So what happens is if you were already on, say, 22.1, we just start from 22.1 forward. We don't go all the way back to 20.3. So that's why it's segregated into different folders, so that we can, we don't want to keep re-importing the same LOVs every month. Okay.
Sure.
And then the same will also be true, you'll see, of repository, is that it's not cumulative. We go through each month at a time from the starting.
Yeah, but let's say your last repository upgrade was 21.10, then you would get all of these imported and applied, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So it's cumulative from your last repository upgrade upwards.
Right, yeah, we just go through each folder and keep adding stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I understood that. Correct. So the repository part is the third. Well, sometimes there's manifest, not too often. There could be OpenUI manifest data. And the repository is one big ZIF file. And because it's a ZIF file, and because you are on an older repository version, the following would work as a way to find out. Of course, you can open the ZIF file with a text editor, but you want to see what differences does it bring. You want to have a difference analysis, a diff. So what I did here, I created a workspace, a developer workspace right under main. And the repository version is, I'm not sure what it is, but it's less than 23. I think 22.10 is my repository version. So if I open that workspace and just start an import from archive and not complete it. So let's take that 20. I want to take 2112. So you have to, of course, look into each and every folder that you're covering, and then just start the import. Well, the first page of the import dialog will give you, well, a sortable list of stuff that that's what the ZIF file contains. So that's very interesting insight already. And then you can say, okay, there's this was which one was this? Okay, and then you can go forward to the next, and that's the last step you should do. You shouldn't import it actually, because the process will import it for you. This will probably take a while, but it's now analyzing the differences, because the ZIF import has a merge feature as well. So it's analyzing the difference of each and every object, and so you get a very quick and easy overview of what objects that you customized have changes in the same area by Oracle. So that's especially helpful on, let's say, business components or workflow processes. So let this just run to the end, and I've recorded this earlier on a video, so I might just skip to that video. And
if you want to wait, I can mention a couple other things I wanted to mention around this topic.
So here you see that.
Go ahead.
So you see the outcome. That's for table ZIF. You can see exactly what column will be changed, etc., in that loyalty table. And here's you can see the business component changes, and you see there's 2 new fields, etc. So that's what we did to get our bearings with what will happen during that big repository upgrade, so you can analyze that. Okay, Brian, you.
Yeah, just a couple of related comments and updates. One, as I mentioned, we're continuing to work on the admin seed data, which we announced in the statement direction quite some time ago. We know we have slipped it several times, but we're getting closer, and so that will support some number of things, and then we'll add more and more things thereafter. So, you know, maybe views and responsibilities will be workspace enabled, and then later data maps. I don't know what, I'm making up things. But the point is that once we've got it done this first time, the hard part's really how do we convert existing data into workspace enabled data. That's quite tricky. Once we've got that completely nailed down, then adding other objects won't be complicated. So that's one comment. So we're still working on that. I want to assure people who might be wondering. Second, we come some time ago, I came to the same observation as you about workflow and task. I hadn't thought about web template, but logically that makes sense. Although don't know that I really recommend changing the Siebel web templates, but I'd have to think about that, as opposed to in that one case cloning, because of exactly this problem.
But for, let's say, order management workflows, it's quite common.
Yeah, right. And anyway, my point being that what and I don't have any kind of time frame, but I wanted to let you know, and also maybe get feedback. I don't know if we have time today, because I see some people already had to drop, but my thought was that we could take something like a workflow and not treat it the same way we treat an applet in terms of conflicts. And so more look at it at a macro level and just say, did something in this workflow change by both the customer and by Oracle? And then in a perfect sunny world, we would then show you some sort of graphical way you could look at the two and compare them visually, because a human really needs to kind of get involved in this situation.
Always, right.
And so, I mean, unless it's something extremely minor, but as soon as you add a box in the middle, merge isn't going to work properly. You end up with a mess, as you found. Anyway, so that we're working on that. So that would help you to just visually see, yes, this is a conflict. And that wouldn't necessarily have to even apply to a repository upgrade, but I mean, you could have the same problem with your own developers. Right. So that's one thing. Another thing that we're looking into, and no timeline, this is all future stuff, and if anyone has feedback on it, please send it to me and Kerry, is also looking at, right now we have a situation where, and a customer reported this as a bug. To us, a conflict means I changed something and you changed something. That's a conflict, right? But there are more subtle problems that are not technically conflicts. So, and that problem is you, customer, are relying on the fact that the search spec is, X equals Y.
Right.
Like, that's important to you. And we change it to, X equals Y and Z equals A or whatever. So that's not a conflict, because you were using the out of the box one. And so we aren't flagging it as a conflict. And so some customers point out that, like, well, but we really liked that old one.
Yeah,
and so
happens.
And so we're working on flagging those. And so basically for any CIF file, originally we were thinking about it for repository upgrade, but I've asked them to consider doing it for any CIF file, because I don't really see the difference, because that's all we're doing with repository upgrade. To highlight those items so that so the customer or partner, whoever's working, configuration person, can look at it and see, oh, this did change. It's not a conflict, but it did change. And that'll allow you to determine if that's okay for it to change. Maybe you don't care, but if you do, it gives you a chance to see it.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are a few things in this area that we're working on. As I said, I don't really have time frames for any of these things. These are all kind of
but it's
whatever. In some cases, recent discoveries. In other cases, just we don't have time right now. We got so many other things we're trying to do, resource bound. But I wanted to let everyone know that we are looking into these things. And then if anyone has any feedback or comments or specific situations they have, yeah, send me an email. We can chat about it, and send Kerry. You know, one of us will talk to you about what you think are your specific needs, and make sure we include those in our eventual design for any things around this. Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Brian, for sharing this, and thanks for the openness. And
Sure.
yeah, super cool to have you, as always.
Alex, so it's James. I don't know if you've got a minute or two. I've got a couple of tips on this area because we've just gone through it. Actually, I could share.
Yeah, sure. You want to do it next Siebel Friday or right now?
Oh, it's only going to be a couple of minutes.
Okay, yeah, please. You want to share a screen? Or?
There's nothing to share really. It's just more to discuss.
Okay.
So, I mean, firstly, as you said, backup. So we had a backup of the database with a Siebel tools available to it. So and we did actually need it. So after we did the merge and ran into some issues, we had the ability to go back before and take a SIF and do a comparison. So that was really useful. I would say performance-wise, because we had a big gap, which is where you started off talking about a big delta of repository stuff to merge in. We ran into some performance issues. So the way we fixed it was a flatten and full publish before we did it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd recommend that. In terms of obviously the tricky thing, like you mentioned about vanilla objects, that's always a harder one, isn't it? To try and work out which ones you've used. So we've got a kind of a search script, so we could pull out vanilla objects that we use. And what we did was we then compared that to the table where the objects are imported into, to get that kind of match of vanilla objects, and then we're able to identify which ones to look at in terms of, you know, conflict resolution. Speaking of conflict resolution, file wins was the default. I don't know if that's just for us, if that's a standard thing, but in most cases, repository wins is what we wanted. So
you mean for the SIF, when the SIF is imported?
Yeah, for, you know, walking through all the conflicts, it
goes with the default resolution. Yeah.
Yeah, but for us, you know, the repository wins is the one that we wanted in almost all cases. So by doing nothing, that would actually cause more issues.
Yeah, like this one that I just have on the screen right now, which the default resolution is file for the merge action, and the repository import uses command line, but it explicitly says merge, and file being the default. So how did you overcome this?
Well, we had to kind of go through it manually, you know, just
and set it back to the original value.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just manually change it. On the resolution, you know, so we'd pick repository wins. But we had to do that analysis first, you know, to work out which objects we cared about. Otherwise, there was too many couldn't go through them all, you know. And of course, most of them you probably don't even need, you know. So that's why knowing which objects you've changed is important.
Yeah, we're talking about,
and then
if you have the large gap that you had, like you had, then we're talking about thousands of objects.
Exactly. So maybe if you do patching monthly, it wouldn't be an issue, but we had a couple of years backlog to kind of get through. And the C data, kind of a similar issue, but what we did for that one actually, rather than your approach, is we used a database link and actually did a comparison of list of values, system preferences, runtime events between the environment we imported into and a copy of it that didn't have it, and then we could easily pull out the delta then of which records have been added in, and then you could review them to see, did we care about those list of values or whatever.
Okay, use a database for that.
Yeah, so it did at a database level. And in general, one-time events was the biggest issue because it had some triggers on that we didn't want. You know, like for example, you know, create an activity on the back of creating a service request. You know, which you know, that tends to be very business specific. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, okay. So yeah, thanks James for sharing this. So yeah, the first repository upgrade is the hard one, and everything else after that is a breeze. So that first one is typically big because you're on 17.0 after you upgrade practically the repository version. well, it has been fixed. If you upgrade to 22.12, your repository version is also 22.12 now. But many customers come from older, and so it applies everything from starting with 20.3, really. So yeah, there's a version number. You can check the repository version number. If you did an upgrade recently, then it's the next repository upgrade starts where you did the upgrade to. Okay, so yeah, that's a lot of topics for today, and a great Siebel Friday, and we're way over time. There's no official end time, but I do appreciate you staying online, and I think we have covered a lot of topics today, and see you next Siebel Friday. Thanks everybody for joining. The video will be up soon on YouTube. There will be a link to the PowerPoint that Nick shared. And any questions, you know where to reach us. Thanks again, Brian and Kerry, for your presence and for your openness.
Very much, thank you. Yeah.